Chapter 2. Ayianna wrapped her arms around her father's waist and rocked with the sway of their old mare Brona. A few shafts of the early morning glow filtered through the limbs, barely lighting the well-worn path to Lord Ramiro's. She leaned her head against her father's back and closed her eyes, reveling in her father's earthly scent. Marriage. Her future secured in the hands of a stranger. Her dream of becoming a stargazer of the Usamor elves gone. No longer would she be under her father's protection. No more would she lay her head on his back and ride to Ramiro's. Tears sprang to her eyes. "There are some things we need to discuss," her father said after riding for a while. Straightening, Ayianna swallowed the knot in her throat and waited for him to continue. "I do not believe Desmond is aware of your heritage." "What?" Ayianna straightened. "You could pass as a human." "Are you suggesting I lie to him?" Her father hesitated. "No, only don't bring it up. If he asks you, then answer how you want. The men of the plains regard their wives differently." "What do you mean? Doesn't Lord Ramiro know you are an elf?" The lengthening silence confirmed her suspicions. "How could you?" "I have my reasons." "Father!" But Ayianna couldn't continue. Instead, she roiled in her thoughts and tried to accept what her father was saying. "Do these reasons of yours have anything to do with what Mother was talking about being exiled from Zuriel?" Her father tensed. "I wasn't exiled." "Then why did we leave?" "We made a choice to leave." He shook his head. "It's in the past. Let's forget about it and think about your future." "A future built on lies!" Ayianna ground her teeth. "This goes against everything you've ever taught me." His shoulders sagged. "Sometimes we are forced to choose against truth for a greater purpose. This is your burden to bear. You must forget about what might have been and live with what is." Ayianna rubbed the edge of the faded saddle in front of her. How could he do this to her? No, it wasn't him. It was her mother. Why did her mother's bitterness have to wreak havoc on everyone else? Some elven maidens never married. Not that she didn't want to, but to enter into such an intimate relationship with a stranger was appalling. "Desmond has sought your hand in marriage, with Lord Ramiro's approval, mind you. So we shall proceed and accept his proposal." "Don't I get a choice?" I don't." Her father shook his head. "Not this time." She pulled back and slumped behind the saddle, refusing to lean into him. She ached for the simpler times back in Zuriel, when all that mattered was attending to her studies, hunting for dove eggs with her brother, and basking in the comfort of her father's presence and the peace that once was their home. The tree receded as the land gave way to harvested fields. The night sky faded as the eastern horizon burned red. Wisps of fog clung to the ground where the warmth of morning met the cold earth. Other villagers appeared out of the thickets, hauling baskets and shovels over their shoulders and heading for the potato fields. Dirt stained their tunics, and mismatched patches dotted drab leggings. Hirelings. Ayianna peered around her father's shoulder. Lord Ramiro's fortress broke from the tree line and towered above the flat fields surrounding it. With new eyes, she admired the stout walls and ramparts overlooking the orange and yellow canopy of trees. A tingle of delight danced down her spine. Nearing the fortress, her excitement gave way to nervousness. She had only seen Lord Ramiro from a distance. A tall man with chiseled features, he kept the operations of his lands under tight control. She took a deep breath and exhaled through her nose. The air reeked of fermenting cabbage, manure, and freshly overturned dirt. Bustling activity inundated the area. Horses snorted as servants took hay and water into the stables. Hirelings stooped over the fields, filling their basket with potatoes. Goats bleated to be milked, and a rooster heralded dawn's arrival. The whole place droned of animal sounds and servants' chatter. Inside the stables, her father reined Brona to a stop. Ayianna slipped off the horse, landing on the hard, packed dirt. She straightened her dress and adjusted the green scarf around her neck. Her father dismounted. His old cap slouched on his head and covered his pointy ears. How did Lord Ramiro not notice? Her father led Brona into a stall and unsaddled her. He handed Ayianna one of the knapsacks. "There is more for us to talk about." Her father scanned the stables and the bailey. "Now is not the time or place for it. But I'd suppose there'll never be a time and a place for the secrets I harbor." "What are you talking about?" Ayianna stared at her father. His gray eyes were wistful. Though he gazed at her, he looked beyond her. She touched his elbow. His face softened as he wrapped his arm around her shoulders and squeezed. "Come, Lord Ramiro is waiting." Ayianna stood in front of Lord Ramiro like a horse on parade. Maidservants came and went. Some took measurements, others pulled and tugged at her clothes, perhaps doing their best to make her presentable for their lord. Polished marble floor met dark mahogany walls. Tapestries displayed men on horseback hunting bears and deer, and a large black cat that looked suspiciously like a haruzo of the desert. On the opposite wall, a tapestry portrayed a different kind of hunt. 3 women clad in pale silks raced through flowering gardens, chasing a white horse with a gold horn protruding from its forehead. The bustling of the maidservants ceased, leaving Ayianna and her father alone with Lord Ramiro. He returned his quill to the inkpot and lifted a parchment, probably the betrothal. Burgundy silk draped his arms beneath a black velvet jerkin. He had blonde hair like Desmond, but he lacked the charm his nephew possessed. Her gaze crossed his, and she quickly looked away. Had she seen a speck of approval in his blue eyes? She didn't dare chance another look. Instead, she studied the cracks in the polished marble floor, her mother's warning still ringing in her ears. "Keep your head covered. Don't look men in the eyes, nor speak unless spoken to, unless you want to be mistaken for a wench at some filthy brothel." "A fine choice," Lord Ramiro's booming voice rang throughout the hall. "I must say, my nephew has great taste. No doubt it is her exquisite beauty that far outweighs the other ladies in waiting for a much more noble breeding." Ayianna cringed inwardly and glanced at her father. He stood rigid and quiet next to a huge window. The light pouring in washed across his tanned face. His brown tunic dulled in comparison to the lord's velvet and silk attire. "Arlen," Lord Ramiro said after the last of the maidservants had left. He strolled across the marbled floors. His boots clicked louder in the growing silence. His gem-studded belt and pendant caught the sunlight, flashing prisms of color against the polished stones. He shook father's hand and grasped his elbow. "You are a good man, and have been one of my best stewards. I am certain Desmond's father would have welcomed this venture. You and your family shall move onto the grounds. Your wife may continue her jewelry making as Desmond sees fit. As for your daughter, she will begin her preparations for the revealing at the Harvest Jubilee. Do you have any objections?" "No, sir," her father replied. "Then you will take the next few days to move your family here. When Desmond returns from Badera, we will host a private feast and finalize the betrothal arrangement. You may go, but I'll expect you back here for the evening meal." Lord Ramiro nodded and strode from the room. A final flash of color and light, and then his footsteps echoed down the hall. Servants scurried past the door, peering in at Desmond's new bride-to-be. Ayianna held her breath as whispers filled the corridor until they faded into silence. Did they approve? If they didn't, how could she live among them? Ayianna lifted her head and looked at her father. A sad smile softened his jawline, but a storm of emotion swirled in his gray eyes. Once outside, Ayianna left her father in the stables and continued out of the gates. He wouldn't need her to saddle the horse, and she needed some time alone. Perhaps she'd find Liam. At least the wolf would listen to her. She surveyed the potato fields. Hirelings worked the soil and filled their woven baskets with dirty, round potatoes. Some hauled their brimming load toward Lord Ramiro's cellars. Others prepared for the midday rest. The sun now hovered above, still plenty warm for fall. Ayanna's thoughts turned to Desmond. She barely knew this man who had asked for her hand in marriage. He was a merchant's son, following in his father's footsteps, while she, on the other hand, was a daughter following a path chosen by her father. Ayianna traced the lettering on her father's leather knapsack. Her mind strayed back to Zuriel and its glittering sea, green mountains and bright stars. She closed her eyes against the tears. Desmond was the death of her dreams. Why did her father leave Zuriel? An honored scribe, he took great care in preserving the ancient books of the elves. He had no enemies. He had loved his homeland. But he had chosen to settle in a nameless village that had no future. Why? Had he committed a crime in Zuriel? Had he been exiled, like Mother said? Ayianna headed toward the woods and scanned the area. Where is she? She should be here by now. A commotion near the front gates brought Ayianna's attention back to the castle. A woman with a baby slung across her back pleaded with Ramiro's chief servant. She moved closer. Please, let me work for your master. Absolutely not. Lord Ramiro won't hear of a Durkian working his fields. Perhaps he'd allow me to glean after his workers have finished. There had better not be anything left to glean when they've finished. There are consequences for such negligence. The baby began to cry, and the woman adjusted the colorful fabric strapping the child to her back. But my family is starving. Do you not have fields of your own to work, livestock to attend to? Please, Baldur, my brother, the fields of Durka are arid and barren. The earth consumes the seeds we plant. Baldur clenched his jaw as his face flushed red. Do not address me so. You have no brother or father among us. How you escaped from the confines of Durka alive is your own business. You know the laws. Be gone from us, for there will be no bloodshed today. He wheeled about and charged through the castle's gates. The woman slowly turned and made her way along the stout curtain wall surrounding Lord Ramiro's holdings. The baby's cry echoed off the brick barricade and pierced Ayianna's heart. She shuddered. Her father's knapsack suddenly felt heavy. She darted after the woman. She rounded the wall just in time to catch a glimpse of her disappearing into the woods. Madam! Madam of Durka! Ayianna called after her. The woman spun, and her desperate eyes narrowed. Her hand grasped a slender dagger hanging from a braided rope at her waist. Dark smudges covered her pale face and arms. Dressed in a red-brown tunic and leggings, the Durkian stood a head taller than Ayianna. Take this. It isn't much. Ayianna offered her knapsack to the stranger. The woman looked at the bag as tears welled up in her eyes. May the Chai bless you. What is your name? Ayianna hadn't heard of the Chai before. Hopefully it was a nice deity and not easily angered like the Nuja. She didn't want strange people lifting her name up before strange gods, but she didn't want to be rude either. She stuck her hand into the pocket of her dress and grasped the worn talisman her mother had given her. The polished white stone was cold and smooth in her hand. I am Ayianna, daughter of Gilana and Arlen. I am Mergetta. I will not forget your generosity, Ayianna. The woman bowed her head and pulled a leather cord free from her neck. My gift in return. I hope it blesses you as it has me. She handed Ayianna a small wood flute and strode off into the trees. Ayianna fingered the small flute. Delicate carvings wove their way around its barrel. She tied it around her neck and brought it to her lips. As she prepared to blow, something crashed through the bushes and knocked into her. Her heart leapt into her throat, but her fear quickly dissolved. Liam! Ayianna grabbed the silver wolf into a huge hug. Where have you been? I had so much on my mind this morning, and then, I have so much to tell you. Liam sat on her haunches. Her long snout cracked open in a silly smile. She panted happily, swishing her tail back and forth. Ayianna buried her face in the lush fur. Father's betrothed me to Desmond, and we're moving to the castle. Life is changing too fast, too soon. Ayianna pulled away and scratched behind Liam's ears. So where have you been? Your feet are all muddy. You better not have been playing in the... Ayianna! Her father's voice echoed off the castle's walls. She straightened. Come on, Liam. Ayianna darted toward the front gate, passing several older hirelings who had stopped working, their gaze following her. An old woman, bent with age and years of hard work, leaned on her shovel. Her cold eyes peered out from the folds of her wrinkly skin. "You'll bring curses on us, you miserable little whelp." Ayianna shrank back from the woman's harsh glare. "What do you mean?" "We've nothing to do with them Durkians," an older man said. He stomped on the shovel's edge, sending it deeper into the dirt. "You'd do best to avoid him." "The whole lot of them wicked and bloodthirsty," another villager drawled as he spat on the ground. He lifted his brown, weathered face and glowered at Ayianna. He rested on his shovel. "Thieves and murderers." "She was hungry," Ayianna said. "How can you deny someone?" "Bad blood, little one, bad blood. They'd be dawdling in things that one ought not to dawdle in. The horrors that haunt them, they'll haunt you too if you be too friendly with them. Ever hear of the Mootats? The Similes? Huttas?" He sneered. "Creatures'll kill you in your dreams, or drive you to do it yourself, I've heard. I'd stay clear away from 'em if I were you." He heaved a large basket of potatoes and hauled it toward the cellars. Ayianna clutched her talisman again. Mootats? The Semiles? Huttas? Maybe he was just trying to scare her. She turned away and sought her father, ignoring the icy stares.